Web3 with Me is a discussion-style podcast about the ins and outs of Web 3.0, hosted by Zach French, known as Off Edge in the verse. From crypto to NFTs, DAOs to DeFi, we cover the abstract philosophical promises and the new business models enabled in this new decentralized world. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or watch the show on YouTube. Thanks and enjoy.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with Me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with Me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with Me.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being listeners of Web3 with Me. I want to take a few seconds to tell you about my exciting new B2B offering. It is the mission here to educate. I sincerely believe Web3 can make the world better for more people. Businesses shouldn't be left out though, so I've launched the Web3 Coach. It's a bespoke education experience designed to help your team understand how Web3 affects your particular industry or company and identify opportunities unique to Web3. Whether you have a law or accounting firm with a growing number of clients participating in Web3 through crypto and NFTs, or you're a real estate syndicate looking for different ways to raise money, or teams just of fast-growing Web3 companies who want to understand your customers and your new teammates, I make sure you can talk the talk and leave feeling more confident about this crazy new world. Please take a minute to check out my website at theweb3coach.xyz. Thanks so much and enjoy the show. My guest today is Jameson, known as Friendly Jameson and viewed as his moonbird in the verse. Jameson started in music, went on to become an e-commerce founder, and ultimately landed in Web3 because of an innate desire to be early in a market cycle. We discuss how Jameson learns, his models for approaching NFTs, and even the origin of my pseudonym as part of a bigger discussion on reputational risk. I think we plan to collaborate on 4 different learning-related missions during this podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. LFG, baby. Time to start vibing. Welcome to the show, Jameson.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you too. I've been following you on Twitter for a while and following like your posts, and I feel like all the stuff that you talk about is the stuff that I feel like I want to represent in Web3 with Me. So I appreciate you agreeing to join, even though we have had very limited interactions before.
Oh, that's fine, man. We're obviously in a few similar communities, so we've crossed each other's paths. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, cool. Well, I always like to start the episodes by getting to know my guests a little bit better. So can you tell us a little bit about your founding story?
Yeah. So I've had a little bit of a varied path, I suppose, as most people have. I was a professional musician for many years. I went and studied music at the Conservatorium of Music here in Australia, and enjoyed that for a little bit, but decided to drop out and actually take on the the stereotypical muso path and recorded a few studio albums and did some touring. And after a little bit, that sort of got a little bit too transient for me, and I felt like I wasn't really achieving much, and made the rather interesting decision to just cut music altogether and go into business. And so my first business with my now wife was a restaurant, and that was a heck of a journey. So we had that for a couple of years, and then we sold it. And I started doing some consulting and set up a bit of a digital advertising and product launch agency, and did that for a number of years. And then at the end of 2019, I started looking into Web3. And yeah, a bit of a convoluted path to get here, but essentially the reason I became interested in it is I had this, during sort of like 2019, I had this urge to be early. Like I felt like I'd never been early to anything. Started a restaurant as a few thousand years late. We had an e-commerce business actually, which we still have, but like we probably missed the boat on e-com by maybe like 2 to 3 years. There was a real boom period there, and had we done the exact same thing 2 or 3 years earlier, it probably would have been, the difference between like a 6-figure business and a 7-figure business. So I always felt like I was just on the wrong side of the bell curve, and I was actively looking for something to be early to, just a weird sort of transient space to be in. And I think I came across the idea of NFTs listening to an episode of My First Million pod where Sean Puri was talking about it. And that sort of led me down the rabbit hole looking at NFT art. And that was at the... that was sometime in 2020, but I didn't actually do anything with it at that time. And then it got to the end of 2020, and things obviously started really heating up in that space. NiftyGateway started launching a bunch of stuff, and I think early 2021 was when I actually got into it. So I probably got my dates muddled a little bit there, but that's my convoluted origin story.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. One thing that you kind of drew attention to was market cycles. It sounds like, you are obviously able to identify market cycles, and how much more exponential the returns can be if you're early to a market cycle. Right. And I think we all like to say we're early here. It's almost become like a bad word to say, but I mean, that was early, especially to Web3. I think, there was obviously crypto early. That was quite a few years before that. But in terms of like the birth of NFTs and really seeing the power of smart contracts, like that started right around then. What was the first piece of art you bought?
That was a Bitcoin Angel by Trevor Jones. I know we both are Trevor Jones collectors, and yeah, that was actually at the time. It was probably just actually. I specifically remember thinking, all right, everything that's been selling on this platform has sort of been going up in value straight away, and that feels weird to me. I don't understand it. Like I don't understand this sort of hype around these things, but.
Even open editions.
Yeah, exactly. Open editions. And I thought, well, look, I'll find one that I like the looks of. And like, I'm not an art collector. I've never even been the slightest bit interested in art. I mean, obviously you could define music as art, but visual art, I've never really been into it. Never collected anything in my life. And so the idea of spending, I think that was $777 US, and I'm obviously Australian, on a JPEG. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was doing it because I hoped that it would go up in value. And ironically, that's one of the only pieces I've never flipped. I've still got it. Even though I bought it hoping that I'd be able to sell it for more. I don't really know how that happened. But yeah, that was my first piece. February 2021, I think my wife found out about it maybe like 2 months later. I wasn't going to tell her that I'd spent that much on a JPEG, but yeah, that started the journey.
That isn't that the piece from Trevor that if Bitcoin hits 70,000, you get like a chance at a 1 of 1 from him, if I'm not mistaken. Or
yeah, I think Bitcoin has to hit 77. 700. Yeah, like 5 sevens. It's funny because at the time, like during the peak of like the most recent sort of bull cycle, I remember jumping into that community, and people, that was the thing they were most excited about. Like, never mind the fact that like if you were holding crypto, you're just like in a really good position. They were just excited about the chance of getting like a 1 in 4,000 chance of getting this. This one.
I almost bought one for that chance. I'm not gonna lie.
I almost bought more when it was getting closer.
And you're just like, I'm just trying to find something to hang my hat on. The value's going to go up, so I can justify spending $4 or $5 grand. Because I think I don't know did it get up to that high? I mean, it definitely didn't stick around 777. It was one of the most traded pieces on NiftyGateway early on. I remember.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it got up into the fours. It could have gotten higher, actually. That was so long ago. And it was funny too, because of course at that point we were all denominating everything in USD, or those of us who were collecting on NiftyGateway, came somewhat naturally for us to denominate in USD, and then I don't know about you, but for me, like within a few months, it was like everything was denominated in ETH, and at least mentally, and I had to go back to NiftyGateway every now and then and just run the calculation, and be like, oh, what's this piece?
So yeah, I remember looking at that Trevor Jones piece and thinking, That's an interesting, maybe this, with Bitcoin, I think at that point was getting up close to like maybe 60,000 or in the 50s. And you're just kind of like, oh, there's this added like possibility here. This is a great piece to speculate on. Right. And speculation was largely what drove my first purchases. I'm not going to lie. I was thinking, when is this thing going to go up and why should it go up and how much should I buy? But then around like April, kind of like right as PAC was releasing the fungible, the market just started going all the way down, and it was an interesting time. I think that it wasn't quite what it is now because there just wasn't as much volume. But up until that point, didn't even have a MetaMask. Did you?
Yeah. I think I did. So I had the point at which I specifically remember being active on OpenSea was before Bored Apes dropped. I don't know when that was. And just like to be very clear, I did not mint Bored Apes. I sat there and watched them mint out. And, that's obviously going to be a story for the kids and the grandkids as to why they don't have generational wealth. But but I think I got my MetaMask, I don't know, whatever, sometime between March and when Bored Apes minted. But I hadn't been super active on it. But yeah, it definitely felt like a brave new world.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a lot of exactly what you would, reflecting back, the euphoria that you look for in a bubble. And I remember being in a group chat with my mentor, Josh, and everybody every single day on NiftyGateway. It was, hey, did you see what's dropping today? What do you think? You're going to go for the open edition? You're going to go for the drawing? What are you going to do?
It's funny how, like, thinking back on that, the most hilarious part about that is that it was based on like internet connection speed and click speed in some cases. To me, that's like, and I guess in a way I was probably a little bit of a disadvantage there because I'm on the other side of the world from like their servers, and I'm not a gamer or anything, so I'm like just sitting here with my Apple, like my MacBook, like trying to outclick all these gaming degens. just wasn't working. But it's funny, hey, because like then we obviously got used to gas wars at some point after that, and it's almost like buying things on a platform using a credit card. It's just like almost like boomer tech. I mean, it's obviously not, but like almost felt like, why the
like
heck
e-commerce.
are we ever
it's more like e-commerce, like traditional
exactly.
e-commerce.
Yeah.
That's funny, man. That whole period was interesting because you get into it. At least for me, I was like, okay, I'm only going to put in what I'm willing to lose, and that quickly went from like 5 or 7K to like 20 or 30, and then you just watch it go down, and then all of a sudden this PFP craze resurrects the whole market. And the only way Nifty was really surviving at that point over the course of the months is when they started to integrate in the listings, right? When they started bringing it in, and you could actually buy stuff that was listed on OpenSea, on NiftyGateway. I like to think they had some decent art still, but I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because, at least from memory, a lot of the people who were into NiftyGateway stuff, particularly who were collecting NFTs for art, missed the early PFP trend, and I was one of them. Even though I'm not an art collector, I sort of like understood the use case. I was like, okay, cool, I understand this idea of like this sort of fine art collectible, quote unquote. Don't want to get on anybody's nerves, but that made sense to me. And then like 10,000 monkey cartoons did not make sense to me. And then the people who it did make sense to were like DeFi guys, right? Like all the DeFi guys were like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. Like it's got nothing to do with the JPEG. And for me at the time, it's probably my own version of being a boomer. I was like, that's not art. That's not art.
That's not art. That's a picture of a monkey. What was your first PFP?
Actually, I don't know. And it's funny that because I obviously didn't have much of a connection to it, I can't remember. I know that one of my first NFTs that I sort of like minted that was sort of outside that NiftyGateway realm was a collection called Dream Loops, and that was sort of like music well, not sort of music. They were like music NFTs with like cool pixel art visuals, and they had like a functionality where you could kind of mix and match like tracks and stuff. And so I was kind of drawn to that as a musician. Obviously, I thought that was cool, but like I bought them and flipped most of them, and that was. I think nearly everybody was unapologetically a flipper at that point. I certainly make no apologies for it. It was just kind of like how things were. And that was cool. That was actually, I think that was when I had my first gas war loss. And then I think I had multiple failed transactions buying them on secondary, and you learn really quickly especially when gas was that high and ETH was, I don't know what it was, like in the 3,000s maybe at that point, and you're losing like $100 if your transaction fails. Oh my goodness. You learn really quickly.
But it's okay because it's 0.02 ETH. Right. Honestly, it's like you're playing with Monopoly money at that point. But then when you actually sat back to think about it, you're like, that was a lot of dollars. Right.
Yeah.
That was
my friends and I actually had this practice. A few of my friends who had met on NiftyGateway. I'm sure you and I had like sort of mutual friends at that point even, but I had a Discord with a few of my friends. We had this practice where we'd jump on voice chat if one of us was going to make a buy or a sell, and we'd say the US dollar amount out loud to one another. Like, rather than just being like, oh, I'm going to list this for like 3.9 ETH, would be like, okay, I'm going to list this for X thousand American dollars.
I've got to make this real, right? Because 3.5 is like 3.5. Like,
it actually did help, particularly with the buying side of things. It helps when you kind of like, oh my goodness, am I actually going to go and spend $20,000 on whatever that is? And when you say it out loud, you're like, I need to think about this.
When I was considering, so I sold a 5 cube for like 6 or 7 ETH at one point. And I was like looking into buying a mutant ape, and my wife was helping me, and we were kind of looking at the art, and she looked at the dollar amount. She's like, are you about to spend $25,000 on a picture of a rotten monkey?
No, the awful thing about that is it would have been such a good move.
Investment. I know. I even had one transaction fail. There was like this one that came up, and I was like, that's it. And like literally like 5 minutes after that, I was just like sitting there with like the wheel of death. Like, oh no, this is not going through. But yeah, it would have been. I got dominated. I actually had an episode with a friend of mine earlier in the podcast where I shared the shame of having gone through like 3 or 4 times of not buying Bored Apes, and then finally getting to the other side mint and jumping through all these hoops only to not get it because I didn't have 2 ETH in gas.
Oh no. No. That was the one that was like that you could absolutely guaranteed get if you
paid the gas. Yeah.
I had a few friends who were in that situation who I was like in real time, because that obviously went on for a few hours. I was like sending them ETH so that they could put their transaction through, so they could speed it up, because otherwise they would have had failed transactions. And I remember kind of just clarifying with them that because the gas was so high, just for me to send them ETH, which is the cheapest transaction to make, right, was going to cost like 0.15 ETH.
Oh, Jesus.
To send them like whatever it was, like an ETH or something. The amount doesn't matter.
And that was when ETH was 3K too.
Yeah, and I just remember clarifying with them. I'm like, hey, like I trust you. I'm happy to lend you like an ETH. This was like 2 or 3 people, but like this is how much it's going to cost for me to actually transfer it to you, and you're going to have to pay that back as well. It's like an immediate 15% interest or something. Yeah. And they were like, yep, do it.
do it. Did they get it?
Everyone got it. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously, if they sold it within the next week or so, then they were up really good. So I guess that worked out. But I'm sorry to hear you missed that. That's a bummer.
Hey, you know what? I came to the realization after that I'm honestly just not good at NFT trading. I still love it. I still buy NFTs every once in a while, but it was good to have that reflection, to be honest. I mean, it was tough at the time. If you watch the episode, I literally like shed a tear. Because it was like, because I went down the spiral. It was like, shit, I did this and it didn't work out. And like, man, maybe I just have been fooling myself this whole time. Like I'm sure you've had moments in your life where you're just kind of like on that downward spiral. You're like, have I just been wasting my time this whole time? obviously you come out of it, and I came out of it within a few hours, but it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah, there was to that point about like trading and flipping. There was a tweet that was making the rounds at the end of June. I've just pulled it up so I could read it. From an account called Jumpman NFT, all one word, and the stat is 1.4 million wallets have traded at least one NFT on an L1, and 5,500 of those wallets have realized a profit of 50 ETH or more. So that's the wallet, obviously not an individual trade.
Yeah.
So out of 1.4 million wallets, 5,500 have realized a profit of 50 ETH or more, and then 400 have realized a profit of 500 ETH or more, and then 100 have realized 1,000 ETH or more. But just that sort of like contrast between the 1.4 mil and the 5.5K, it kind of, it's like being quote unquote good at NFT trading actually, to some extent, at least on that level, puts you in the vast minority.
Yeah, it shows you the true like fat tail returns or power laws that come with NFT trading, or just
Right.
speculative assets in general, right?
Right. I'm glad I didn't see this a stat like this before I started, because I would have just automatically assumed that I would be in the cohort of providing exit liquidity, which I have been many times.
Yeah, of course. Me too. I want to change gears a little bit, because one of the things that really drew me to you, and just the way that you communicated it, is that it always seems like you're learning, right? And you're trying to impart what you learn on others. What are your methods for learning? How do you consume content? Do you have ways of teaching yourself things? What does that process look like for you?
It's pretty sporadic, to be honest. For me, so like the last whatever it's been, like 18 months, I've learned a lot by doing, right. So just, and arguably the best way to learn, like you have your failed gas transaction, you try to figure out why, try to figure out how to do that better next time around, and that leads to a question of what the heck is a gwei? Like, why am I paying this gwei to some unknown entity? And so there's that form of learning where, I mean, I guess you'd call it just learning through mistakes, but that's obviously a bit sporadic, and sometimes you want to pursue a new sort of like field of study, for lack of a better term. And I find that, like, for me, I've really being in this space has piqued my curiosity on a number of fields that I've never had any exposure to. So, for instance, I consider myself economically illiterate. Like, there was no such thing as, I didn't learn economics in high school. I don't know anyone who did. And then I obviously chose not to study it formally at a tertiary level. And so I've had no exposure to how the broader macroeconomy works. And through being in this space, that's something that has started to stand out to me. I'm trying to understand cycles and like what factors are influencing the crypto markets and the NFT markets. And so with something like that, what I generally do is just have a bit of a period of focus, like, I don't know, a month or something. It's not necessarily preset, but I'll just find like the best podcasts on the topic and people who are consistently talking about it, and then kind of hop on Twitter and also find accounts that are talking about. And there's a certain style of communication that I look for, right? It's not this sort of like crypto bro, like bold prediction, then delete the tweet if I'm wrong. It's people who are like constantly, going back over things they said 3 and 6 months ago and pointing out where they were right, and very importantly, where they were wrong. And I find a few of those sorts of accounts and turn tweet notifications on, create lists, and then basically every time something pops up that I don't understand, I just spend a little bit of time looking into it and trying to gain a better understanding of it. And that sort of branches out. And obviously from there, you find new and interesting topics that you enjoy learning about. But one thing I'm trying to do over the next sort of like few months is put a little bit of structure to that. And I'm not really sure how I'm going to go about it. So this is like a work in progress, but I do want to sort of like give myself a bit of focus time on a few key areas, and try to actually dig deeper rather than just like waiting for an interesting tweet to show up.
So you would, I guess, in that sense, actually like be a researcher, right? Like actually go in, find more podcasts, maybe find books, maybe take a course. I know you recommended some great courses on blockchain at one point. But like
Yeah.
actually go in and just approach it kind of like you're studying for an exam, almost like just completely analytically and critically learn a subject.
Yeah, and that's something I'd like to give. I'd like to create a little bit of space to do. I don't know if the whole sort of like textbook studying format will necessarily work for me, but I have certainly looked at a few courses. I mean, even something I know is a somewhat controversial figure, but even Michael Saylor has a whole essentially free online curriculum called Saylor University or something like that. And that's basically like Bitcoin 101, Austrian economics 101. And so I've just signed up for that. I'm like, whatever, there's going to be a bunch of stuff here that I don't already know. So I'll give it a shot. But one thing that actually has really, really helped me with learning is writing. And this is probably a bit generic and a bit cliche, but every now and then I'll write a thread. And particularly one good example is I wrote about the ETH merge. And this is a term that you just hear thrown around a lot in the Ethereum community and on Twitter. And I had no idea what it meant, but I thought I'll write a thread about it, because like you can't, unless you're just copy pasting somebody else's content, you can't write a thread about a technical subject without having like a base level understanding. And I found that really helpful, because I felt like I was simultaneously working on something while learning, rather than just learning for the sake of learning. So it felt productive. And I don't know, like if you enjoy, for anyone listening, if you enjoy writing, then that's a really awesome way to learn.
Yeah, I do. I've always, my wife shunned me to the podcast first, but I am a side writer. So
Oh, nice.
she said you need to be speaking first, but I promise you will write at some point. Because when I was going through my journey of joining Web3 full time, I was like, I'm going to be a writer. She's like, no, podcast first. So that's why I'm here. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'll have to I did not catch your thread on the merge. I know it was a big subject, and I actually was not paying attention during the craze about it. I think it's kind of died down now for obvious reasons, but that is an interesting subject. And also Michael Saylor does a good job, at least on the podcasts I've heard him on, of pulling out the numbers related to PhDs and talking about how can we possibly expect everyone to be educated when it costs this much to be a PhD. It's shown that only this many people have actually achieved PhDs. And then even the people that do are in loads of student debt, right?
Yeah. The incentive structure is all whacked, right?
Yeah. It's completely out of whack.
It's kind of like not to get too political, but there's that analogy with politics too, where the incentive structure to be like the leader of a nation, it doesn't, in many cases, it doesn't select for the most intelligent, competent people. You have like edge cases like Singapore, where I don't know what the terminology they use is, prime minister or governor or something of Singapore is like a PhD in math and holds like a couple different degrees or something. And it's like, okay, so what is it about the incentive structure of their political system where somebody like that can rise to that level, as opposed to fill in the blank examples from your country or my country?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's Lee Kuan Yew, I believe, was I think the kind of I guess person who brought Singapore to the prominence that it's in right now. And a lot of the quotes that I've heard are, I ran it like a business. I ran it like a startup, right? We had to be scrappy. We had to find the best people that, we didn't want to find somebody who's studied economics for 20 years and let them be an economist. We wanted to find people that had studied 18 different subjects and they were polymaths and could provide all kinds of unique viewpoints about economics, right? Whereas our incentive structure in the US and maybe Australia to an extent too, is like, it's totally different. I mean, I have the conversation regularly, like, what if we just changed the president's salary to $5 million a year? I think we would attract better talent. I know that sounds crazy, but like just that simple fact, like why would someone like Jamie Dimon or Jeff Bezos or like somebody who you would consider a very smart person who's running very successful billion-dollar businesses, why would they want to be president? Right? If that's who you want in president. But why would someone who's successful in business want to be president if they got to take a massive pay cut at the very least, if nothing else, right? Other than the stress that goes with being the president of the United States or the president of a country or the prime minister of a country, you really need like the incentive structure to bring in the talent, right? And that starts with pay. But obviously there are other factors too.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. There's a lot of there's a lot of nuance, I think, to thinking about political systems as they exist and potentially as they may exist in the future. I know that like a podcast I just listened to recently was Tim Ferriss's latest interview with Biology, and that
I haven't caught it yet.
Right, because he's just released his book, the Network State, I believe. And man, I mean, one thing I love about listening to that guy is I've never felt dumber in my life than every time I listen to him, which is it's a beautiful feeling. Like I love that. It's so humbling. He's the definition of a gigabrain, but hearing him kind of fuse, I'm not going to attempt to do it justice, but hearing him fuse the sort of like the topics of geopolitics and Bitcoin maximalism and like, whatever Web3 technology, distributed communities. It's insane. It's like just a whole nother level of thinking.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I feel Raoul Pal is similar. I don't know if you ever follow Raoul Pal. Great thinker in the macro space too. So if you were following the rabbit hole of learning macroeconomics, I imagine you came across him, right?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking of signing up for Real Vision. I have a few friends who are signed up. Are you in Real Vision?
No, I've also been thinking I'll do it with you. How about that? Okay. We can join together and conquer
it. Yeah, we'll just start spending money on things that have like a like an intrinsic sort of holistic return and investing in yourself instead of flipping JPEGs.
Instead of flipping JPEGs. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm glad we got to talk a little bit about your learning methods. It's really important. I'm a hyper curious person myself, and then I assume, or at least what I'm trying to impart on my audience is that sense that you should always be learning. Right. This is a space where a couple months can feel like a couple years. Every week there's something new coming out, and it works in two ways, in my opinion. It works to keep you constantly excited, right, about what's on the horizon, but it also works in the other way where you can feel constantly overwhelmed. One of your most powerful threads that I read, and I think it's your pinned thread, was talking about burnout, right? And it's like, it's easy when you get in this space to just get overwhelmed with all the different use cases and all the technical limitations and all the security stuff. And it's just, there's a lot going on all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I suppose there's an element of like self-directed, either like I suppose either learning or participation, that the fact that there's no structure around it, right? Like you would have in a 9-to-5 or in maybe like a university curriculum, and where we can, I don't know about you, but for me, it's been sort of like 18 months of like rolling out of bed at 6 a.m, grabbing a coffee, and then just like sitting in front of my laptop and, either degenning or learning or researching or writing, whatever the case may be. And because there's for me personally, because I was stupid enough to not put a sort of like a healthy structure around it. Some days I'd just be doing that until it got dark, and I'd like kind of look out the window and realize that, now it's nighttime. And that's, I mean, you don't need to be a genius to know that that's not healthy. But it kind of lends itself, this space lends itself to that sort of form of participation. There's that combination of sort of like, competitiveness, like, I don't know, there's a lot of sort of Wall Street bro energy in the space, but I think there's also, it attracts a lot of sort of type A personalities. And if you've got a bunch of type A personalities participating in one arena, I mean,
not to mention there's no boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So and I mean, like geographic boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. So like everybody everywhere, if you're sleeping for 5 minutes or you're not paying attention for 5 minutes, at some points you felt like you were missing out.
Many times.
And many times you did miss out, right? Like, that was the hard part, is that you kept getting proven wrong. And no matter how unhealthy the FOMO feeling is, I remember the FOMO dropped, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, there's so many examples of that, like that sort of like, and I guess it's like also the relationship to your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, where you can be like winding down, like for instance, both the FOMO drop actually, I don't know. I don't remember the FOMO drop. For me, that was late at night. But when Park first opened their Discord, I was lying in bed, about to fall asleep, and then there was like I had tweet notifications turned on, and I just so happened to like pick up my phone and like saw a notification and got in the Discord. And but it's moments like
on
that
the first
where, like,
try? That's
right, yeah.
amazing.
So the first, right, which was so whatever the first 100 people or something, which at the time felt like something spectacular. But I remember the feeling that because I sort of got in and there were a bunch of people in there saying, GM, oh, are we in the first 100, whatever, and then all of a sudden, whichever I'm going to butcher this, whichever nervous system I was in, switched to the other one, which you don't want to be in, the fight and flight.
Yeah.
If you're just about to go to bed, and then I was up for another 3 or 4 hours. I was like, oh, this is so exciting, everything's happening, and that happens a few times a week.
It does. And then that stacks up, and then that happens then you're at a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and your body's dead. You just can't maintain it, like no matter what you put in it. So what was it? I do want to get back to regularly scheduled programming, but what was your, I saw the tweet thread. Did you start practicing the things that you were tweeting about and kind of get back on track at that point?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, it was, I mean, part of it obviously is that like being switched on all the time, and I'm not going to pretend that I would have been able to sort of like break out of that cycle had we still been like in the hype of full crypto bull market and NFT bull market. I don't know if I would have been able to. I don't know if I'd have the discipline to walk away from opportunities for the sake of like, I don't know, like getting out in nature. But I have been very very consistent in a couple things. My wife and I go for a walk every afternoon, like 4 or 5 kilometers in the quote unquote the bush here in Australia. And just, like, you obviously don't take phones or anything like that. And just get out and like smell the different smells and hear the beautiful sounds of the birds in the rainforest and stuff. Just all that sort of gear where it's like, okay, there's got to be something healthy about that. Forest bathing, I think they call it. Trying to do a little bit more exercise. Obviously that goes hand in hand. And then the other thing for me has really been like, being mindful of putting gaps in between periods of time spent on, I don't know, the laptop or the phone or something, and really making sure that there's space, whether it be to like go and cook a healthy meal, like actually chop up vegetables, what it's such simple stuff, right? But it might take half an hour to make a healthy dinner. It might take 5 minutes to cook some shit that you
put it in the microwave.
right. So, but that half an hour is obviously incredibly valuable if you can nourish your body the right way. And anyway, all this sort of stuff. I don't want to come off as like I don't want to laugh as a nutritionist.
Yeah, no, I mean you aren't, but it's almost like there's like a beauty in just actually preparing the meal, right?
Yeah.
It happens to also be healthy, but like just the act of like, all right, I've got like 5 or 10 different ingredients here, and I've got to prep those ingredients before I start cooking them. And I like that a lot. I've actually never really thought about that. Me and my wife get in like this routine of like, we're going to have, spaghetti bolognese this night. We're going to have salmon with teriyaki sauce this night. We're going to have this, but like having to go in and like actually think about the ingredients and everything it makes a difference, I'm sure.
Do you know what's a life hack to that? Well, sorry, for me, obviously there might be different opinions on this, but I found that, and this kind of comes back to art in a way, or like a one form of art. I really like knives, and there was one point a few years back where my wife and I were going to buy like a really expensive knife block as sort of like our Christmas present to ourselves. And I had a look at it, and there were like whatever, I don't know, like 8 knives or something, and I knew that I would only use like 2 of them. It's just this whole like nice knife block sitting on your kitchen bench. But from my own sort of like cooking practice, I know that like say 90% of the time I'm using like a 20 centimeter chef knife or a 22 centimeter chef knife, and then the rest of the time I'm just using like random other little knives. And so instead of buying the knife block, I bought myself like a really, really nice Japanese chef's knife, like folded steel, all this stuff, and learned how to sharpen it on whetstones. And I find that even now, I haven't been as diligent with keeping it as sharp as it should be. But I find that actually the process of preparing dinner, I get enjoyment out of it because I'm using that tool. It's just a beautiful tool, and there's an element of art in that, which is kind of cool. So that's a bit of a hack for me.
I like that. I mean, it's almost like you. I can't remember who it was. Somebody on Tim Ferriss. He was like a wealth manager or something. But he says you find the things that you really like and just turn it up a notch. Maybe spend a little bit more than you're comfortable with investing in that. And trust me, you'll take it a little bit more seriously. And just by virtue of doing that, you kind of build that kind of like mental, like I belong here using this nice knife. For me, it's running. Like I belong here wearing these nice running clothes, right? But I can see that for sure. So yeah, I appreciate you kind of elaborating on that. I think that is one of the things that this space faces a lot. I don't think a lot of people are facing it right now necessarily, at least not for the same reasons. But it's good to know that, like, you know, what are different techniques that can help you get back to that space. I find it really interesting. Just a quick like personal side from my story is I was in-house counsel at a software company up until February of this year. I started trading NFTs just about the same time you did, early 2021. And I was doing it in my spare time from my job. And any moment that I had, I was in Discord, I was figuring out what I was doing, or I was on WhatsApp group chats, and I was trying to buy a JPEG, and I was trying to just, you know, figure out like what the next great move was. But as soon as I quit my job, I actually spent less time in Discord, and I spent a lot less time buying NFTs, and I started just meeting with people as much as possible. Like people that I may have interacted with a little bit, I would just meet up with them. If it was a remote, then we met on Discord. And then sometimes there were people that I knew were in Web3 in Atlanta, and I would just be like, hey, dude, you want to go grab coffee? Right. And like having those conversations and everything, I'm not saying like either way is the right way, but it was really helpful for just my whole, like I didn't get as much of like emotional pull into the NFT space as frequently when I was just starting to like, I don't know, I say build, right? But I guess it's kind of cliche now, but
Can I ask you then, like,
Yeah.
how, because that's like, I resonate with that. I've had very, very limited opportunities to meet people in real life from Web3, partly being in Australia, partly also not living in like one of our very few major cities. But I resonate, like the few times I've met up with people, it doesn't even necessarily matter how into it they are. It just kind of feels really healthy to have a conversation with people who are kind of understand what you're talking about and have experienced some of the things you've experienced. But as far as the virtual ones go, like you said, you started spending less time in Discord and you just started jumping on calls with people. Were they people that you knew, or did you sort of like go out of your way to like network a little bit? And if so, like how did you approach that?
Yeah, I actually just would send kind of like I sent you like a DM.
Yeah,
I was just like, hey
that's
man,
the answer.
yeah, I that's exactly what I do. And people want to talk, right? And I think a lot of people, I mean, you're not face doxed for the audience. We never address that. That's why you see a picture of the moonbird. But
No, this is what I look like in real life.
I like it. You got nice blue eyes, man.
Intense.
So
Brooding.
but no, like there is, and people like they start to realize this after you connect with them. Like there's a whole nother level of connection just by the spoken word, right? And then I would start to turn on my video first because I didn't really care about being doxxed. Like I have a pseudonym. My pseudonym on is Off Edge, but like I wasn't like hiding who I was. And so like I like started to reach out to people. I'm like, hey, this has been a great conversation on Discord. Oh, I saw your conversation with so-and-so. Would you ever want to like connect? I think you and I could like share some really cool thoughts. And I just made friends that way. It was almost like I was like going to like the bar, right? And I'm like, hey, want to talk? Right? Or at like a networking event. And like, because I don't think a lot of people do that, people were pretty open to it. Like very rarely did anybody ignore me or like blow me off. Right. And I ended up making like, I mean, a lot of my first podcast guests came from that. And my podcast guests now come from that. Just being willing to put yourself out there and say, hey, you want to have a conversation? Right. It's not much more complicated than that.
I like what you just said, that not a lot of people do it. And therefore it's almost like the, it's almost like the reaction to that sort of outreach. Whereas in Web 2 or the corporate world, it might be sort of like, don't bother me, like enough of this unsolicited crap. But
I don't know who you are. Who are you?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And I got anxiety about it. I was like, well, I'm not like a Bored Ape collector or like, or anything like that. But eventually I was just like, screw it. I'm like, I want to just talk to interesting people. And now I am.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you asking that. It's helpful for people to know how to network, because I think a lot of people just think you have to meet people in the Discord and you have to have extensive conversations. And for the audience, like, other than like 2 or 3 tweets, like you and I have never talked, right? We talked for a little bit before the episode, but I just got your vibe, and now we're having a really interesting recorded conversation. I'm sure you've had those conversations too with your friends where you're like, we should have totally recorded that. Right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. But I appreciate you answering that though, because even for me, I don't know, even for me, that sounds weird, but like, I don't, I'm kind of too shy to like cold DM people. I always think I'm imposing, like,
you can say even for you, because you have a lot of followers, like, especially for Twitter. So like you are in a position of like, whether you want to be or not, is of social hierarchy.
Don't say the word. Don't say the word, the I word. Don't say it.
I didn't. I was going to say social capital. And no, I'm just kidding. But like you wouldn't expect. If you told me you were shy, I would be surprised. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, for sure. It's kind of like easy to be. I think if you're writing a tweet or something like that, it's you spend time on it, or even if you wrote a blog post or an email newsletter, it's kind of easy to get to a point where like if you spend enough time on it, you're going to be sort of like happy with the product, you're happy to hit send. But I don't know, for me, it's like a very different feeling to jump on audio or to sort of like cold DM somebody. I would say that actually I have some friends who have podcasts in the Web 2 space, and as far as this whole sort of bullshit social hierarchy thing. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear here.
Yeah, you're good.
But yeah, like this social hierarchy thing goes. I have friends who are within their industry, sort of like quote unquote, were nobody's sort of thing, but they just started like reaching out to people and ended up getting, particularly in this like the sort of like the digital advertising space. I have friends who have like interviewed some of the biggest names in the world, and they're still not like. They haven't done anything else. And again, this is that weird sort of social hierarchy thing, which I hate the vibe of. But I kind of asked them how did you get that person to talk to you? And they were like, oh, I just kept emailing them like once a month. I'm like, wait, so you annoyed them into talking to you? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. Like, eventually they set a date. I'm like, I mean, I admire the hustle, but I can't do that. I feel weird doing that.
I'm going to be vulnerable here. I actually get more nervous like communicating on Twitter openly than I do DMing someone. Like, I'd much rather DM you and be like, hey, dude, can we connect sometimes? You're cool, right? Than like actually getting out there and typing an answer to your thing and getting back and forth. Like, I have to say, like, a lot of times I'll respond to someone of social hierarchy like you, and I'll be like, did I say that the right way? Should I say it differently? Like, I feel like I was dating a girl almost, for the first time.
Hey, we need to coach each other.
Okay, there we go. The yin and the yang. Let's make it happen. I mean, we're going to be taking Real Vision courses together now. So,
right.
We're studying together. We're learning together. We're communicating together.
Yeah, right. We're like a couple of college kids.
Yeah, exactly. Except for this time, I actually get a lot out of college. I don't know about you, but when I went last time, it was just about one thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, that and maybe some other things, but definitely that. Yeah. Actually,
the other things, I don't know if I want to make those motions on.
Actually, I have a little funny anecdote about that. A little while back, I posted a photo on my Twitter. I don't know if it might still be there. It might not be. Of my wife and I were on a short vacation, and I posted a photo of us like sitting up on a hill looking over the ocean, and all you could see as far as like our bodies were our pants, and we had Ugg boots on. I don't know if that's an Australian thing, but people tend to know what they are.
Yeah, I knew what they were.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like furry boots. Yeah, okay. Okay, this reaction from you. In America, I found out very shortly after I posted that there's kind of like a stereotype around Ugg boots, and I got so much shit from my Web3 friends, and one of them said, the only people in America who wear Ugg boots are college girls getting around in their pajamas. Like he
The
said,
walk
like,
of shame.
yeah, he's like pajamas and Ugg boots or something, and he's like, that's like how I think of you and your wife, sort of thing. So
You're like, no, they're from Australia. They're legitimate. That there are purposes for wearing these things.
dude, I don't get it. They are comfortable. They are warm. They are practical. You can go into your house, then outside of your house, down the beach. Oh, they're fantastic shoes.
They, I would say they have like the social stigma of bougie in America, in my opinion. So they get like
bougie.
Yeah. So like if you're like, I think this is kind of a weird example, but it's the first one that popped in my head. When you're maybe going through security at an airport and you see the priority lane, a lot of people in the priority lane rocking Uggs.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's funny. That is so funny. Because like for me, it's like I'll only wear them on like the coldest days here because I live in a fairly warm climate. So I'll only wear them when it's really, really cold. And then any time other than that, I'm wearing what we call thongs. I think you guys call them flip flops or something.
Yeah.
Like
well, we have a
90%.
different kind of thong.
Right, yeah. But yeah, like 90% of the year I'm wearing flip flops, which are obviously, the furthest thing away from bougie that you can get, right? Like,
yeah, they're definitely like beach vibes. But anyways, all right.
Sorry, I hijacked your podcast.
I love it. All right, now it's over. No, I'm just kidding. So I do want to ask one of my most traditional questions, and I am very excited to hear your answer, which is, how do you define Web3?
Why did you have to say I'm very excited to hear your answer before that? Everybody's waiting for something insightful.
If it makes any difference, I've also said that to other guests. So
okay, fantastic.
You're all good. You're just another guest.
So it's it's weird, right? Because like the easiest thing to do is draw a corollary to Web 2. And that's probably the easiest way for most people to begin to understand it. But I think something that really resonates, because I know that like the question is sort of generally posed by people who are new to the space. And so something that I think really resonates with people is this idea of control of information or control of data, right? It's obviously something that's been a little bit of a contentious issue over the past few years, more so than ever before. And the easiest way that I like to sort of explain it to people, in this sort of scenario, I try to imagine how I would explain it to my parents who are in their 60s, which I've done before. So the easiest way I attempt to explain it is that Web3 sort of aims to remove control of the internet as a whole from like monopolistic sort of entities like big tech companies, and basically return that control or that ownership of data and content to the users of the network. So a company, Web 2 is companies own the networks, Web 3 is communities own the networks. And so theoretically, Web 3 lets anybody build anything on the internet without having to rely on centralized monopolies. And that's obviously a little bit vague and it opens a massive can of worms, but that's kind of like the 101 from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to explain it. And it has a lot of overlap with others' definitions, but the way that you worded it in terms of who controls the network is completely novel. I do not hear that quite often. While there is often the comparison of like Facebook to, now owning your data, Facebook used to own your data. Like the way that you explained it is interesting. And I like that you gave the context of explaining it to a boomer. Right. That is one thing amongst my family and friends, as I've done this podcast, that they keep asking, they're like, can you just make an episode where if my parents listen to it, they can have a conversation with me about Web3?
Yeah, that is so important. This is something I've thought about a lot in terms of like what should be built in this space. And I think particularly like audio onboarding is important, right? Because podcasts have become so sort of pervasive in our lives in a good way. Like most people will listen to some form of audio while they're doing mundane tasks during the day. And I think the opportunity to actually learn the 101 of any given topic by hearing somebody explain it in such a way that's just caters to boomers. It's funny that you say that. I've actually been called a boomer a few times in this space, which is ridiculous, and I take great offense to it. But actual boomers.
We know you're actually a disguised boomer.
Yeah. I'm 31, and I like, obviously, you never know who you're hanging out with until you actually ask people their age. And I've been in rooms. I'm sure you're the same. I've been in rooms where like there's like a 17-year-old, and then there's a 60-year-old, and like there's sort of like a little bit of nuance in the way they communicate that might give it away a tiny bit, but really not enough that you would know there's that much of a difference between them. So
I've had to ask what a lot of words mean, like based king, stuff like that. What is that? Please explain it. Thank you, Rembrandt, for explaining it to me and not calling me a moron.
Well, actually, you know what? Go ahead if you want to. I don't know what base king means.
I mean,
what does that mean?
The way he explained it to me was like, it's just like a really cool dude, right? I'm just like, based king? I'm like, based in what? What are you based on? Are you based on fairy tale? Are you based on this? And they're like, no. Based means just like cool, man. Like, means like, what's up, dude? I'm like, huh? Right. Now I feel like a boomer. I'm 36, but I feel like a boomer.
Right. I think to some extent you and I are definitely boomers, at least in this space. When you said based king, what are you based on? Yeah. Okay. Now I know there are a few people I see in Discords. There's one person in particular who uses based in their name. I see them everywhere, and now I know that they're just kind of like peacocking, cool. Essentially. Yeah, no, exactly. They're not cool. They're trying to sell people.
No, they're not cool. They're trying to be cool.
They're trying, yeah.
Aesthetically speaking. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so I have a proposal for you, and I'm making it on the podcast, so you have to accept it. Are you ready? Ooh. Let's collaborate on a Web3 for Boomers podcast.
Oh, that'd be cool. I would love to do it. I don't know if I'm the right person to do it. I don't have deep technical knowledge, but if you think we could do something cool, then yeah, sure.
Maybe we'll do the Real Vision class. We'll figure it out. It'd be kind of cool. You don't have to answer now. You can answer later.
I'm completely open to it. I just want to make sure that I'd be the right person to. I mean, like giving like a 3-sentence answer to what Web3 is different to like getting a boomer from like 0 to 100.
But I mean, think of it, and this is what's helpful about it is the way I think about it is not that you need the boomer to be a participant in the space, although that would be nice. I think about it in the sense that the boomer wants to be able to have a conversation with their children between the ages of 15 and 40 about the space, and how can you equip them for that? Like, they don't necessarily need to know what the difference between layer ones are, but they do need to know what the difference, like what is ETH, right? Just broadly speaking. So I don't know. We can spitball it a little bit.
No, I like that. That's a really good point. Actually, is that they need to know enough to maintain their relevance within their community as this tech grows.
Right. And then just say yes when their kids say, just give me 10% of your wealth to invest.
Right. Okay, this is quickly becoming like a some sort of investment advisory service or something.
Don't worry, I have a very good disclaimer. I'm a lawyer, so I have a really good disclaimer.
No, I know, actually. I listened to that. The first time I listened to your podcast, I was like, cool, this has got a good vibe. And then then there's what is it? A
Zach
woman's
French
voice.
Is a bar certified attorney.
Yeah, and like speaking like real fast, and I was like, wow, this is heavy stuff, and then back into like the funky vibe.
Anyways, I wanted to kind of get into, if you have something that you want to share, sort of the mental models that you use to approach this space. If there's certain things that when you're looking either at a collection or at a project or at a protocol or trying to understand something better, are there certain models that you use to help you better understand it and kind of approach it from more of an objective perspective?
At the moment, and especially in this sort of environment, where I'm personally not deploying much capital at all, there's a few things that I've started to pay attention to over the past few months, and it was I was starting to think this way even sort of like during the height of like sort of November, December, and the reason I was starting to think this way is because it felt to me like there was just there was too much trash. Aside from the fact that it was pretty obvious whether you study economics or not that we were in like a bit of an everything bubble. So like, you have the everything bubble, then you have the risk assets bubble, then you have the crypto bubble, then you have the blue chip NFT bubble, and then you have all this speculative junk. Like we were in the biggest bubble of any other bubbles. We were in the cumulative bubble. So at that point for me, I was like, okay, obviously this is unsustainable. Therefore, if I do want to continue participating in the space and continue investing in the space, what are some things that I feel would be important going into what is inevitably going to be like a downturn, whether it lasts for a month or a year or whatever. It's obviously coming. So this is December last year or January, February this year. And one thing that started standing out to me was, as much as we sort of like glorify decentralization, anonymity, and let's just throw in a pinch of hypocrisy here because I'm anonymous / pseudonymous, semi-doxed through my lovely wife at this point, but at the moment still not necessarily. You're looking at a pixelated owl, but
yeah.
But no, I started to, yeah, that's me. Yeah, yep. Those Scandinavian eyes. But I started thinking. I started placing value in the idea of doxed founders, and I know that's a bit contentious, but keeping in mind this was the framework for this sort of mental model was if NFTs go into a deep sort of winter, if crypto itself goes into a deep winter, and I want to be still deploying capital during that period of time, the risk to reward is just not there for most projects founded by anonymous founders. Now there's like a weird gray area where there's like, for instance, some people who follow me, right, who don't know me in real life, if I launched an NFT of any sort, there are people in my following who would feel enough trust in me to purchase it. And so there's obviously those sort of like, yeah, thank you. There's obviously those sort of like edge cases. But for the most part, and particularly when you're talking about deploying larger amounts of capital, I started formulating my thinking around people who had, if not like proven track records in Web 2, at least some sort of reputational stake. And this is the thing that is so important in my mind. Obviously, you can have a reputational stake as an anonymous person to some extent. Like I have a reputational stake as Jameson, but it doesn't necessarily affect my IRL reputation. But when you have people like, I mean, I'll use Moonbirds as an example because obviously I'm part of that community. When they dropped, I was buying one no matter what. I didn't get in on the raffle. I knew I had to fork out a ridiculous amount of money on secondary, but I was buying it no matter what. And the reason is because I've obviously followed Kevin Rhodes for a long time, and he has an IRL reputation, which, by the way, is a solid reputation. And he's staking that thing on this project right now. I mean, at the very least, if he rugged, his reputation would be ruined. But even if the project failed, it's not that his reputation would be ruined, but his reputation is certainly tied to it. And so when I started thinking about like what I might want to invest in over the next sort of like 6 to 12 months, I do have a bit of a natural bias towards investing in projects that have people on the other end of them, or teams or founders who have reputational risk. That's kind of like the thesis at the moment.
I completely agree. And if you didn't point that out, I was going to. And that transcends the doxed versus not doxed. It just so happens that more often the doxed people have more of a reputation because it's tied to in real life. But you still have a reputation. It just happens to be purely digital, right? When it comes to who Jameson or Friendly Jameson is, right?
Yeah, it's actually a weird thing too, because I've only started really thinking about it in the last few months, where I've never felt like I had. The whole point of being pseudonymous in the first place, right, or anonymous, is that you don't have reputational risk. Like that's in many ways that is actually the point, right? You can, maybe like particularly within when maybe it comes to sensitive topics, it could be any sensitive topic, but like the idea that you can share an opinion freely without. Without it imposing a reputational risk to your in real life, without the idea that somebody might try to quote unquote cancel you, who you are on your birth certificate.
Yeah.
that was part of the allure at first, and I think I've told you before, I never really intended to try and grow a quote unquote following. But now it is weird because now even as an anonymous individual, I feel like I have a reputational risk, and so my reasons for remaining anonymous are diminishing a little bit. There's still the personal security thing, which was the primary reason in the first place. But my beautiful wife has gone ahead and dashed our hopes for personal security.
Just hire some private security at your house 24 hours a day. No big deal.
Right. But anyway, I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm not a big enough whale for that. But yeah, that sort of idea of reputational risk as an anonymous individual is fascinating. It's multifaceted, and it's really fascinating. I think of people like people who I look up to in the space, like who are still, I would say, still anonymous, like somebody like Zeneca, who obviously uses his first name in his letters, but it's kind of like halfway between, I suppose. Somebody like that, I see them in many ways having more of a reputational risk for their online persona or their pseudonym than they do in real life. I assume that, but this might be too much of an assumption, but I assume that Zeneca is quote unquote bigger as Zeneca than he is as his IRL name. And that's a weird.
So is Zeneca not doxed his real name? Because he's obviously doxed his face. He's on a podcast.
Yeah, and he uses I know he uses his first name. I don't know whether he uses his last name. The other reason I use him as an example because he lives in a similar region to what I do in Australia. He's not here currently, but his home is in a sort of similar area to mine here. I don't know if he's actually doxed his full name, so I guess that's not for me to say. But it is interesting to think that in his particular case, and I'm probably headed this way a little bit on a micro sort of scale. My digital persona or my Web3 persona probably has more quote unquote clout. It comes back to that stupid social hierarchy thing. It has more sort of clout or influence or whatever the word you want to use than what I carry IRL in the industries that I've been involved in IRL, and which is a weird thing. It's a weird feeling, but yeah, I think there's that strange sort of crossover that's occurring. Yeah,
at least it's a normal name. I mean, when I try to explain to people who 6529 is or 4156, they're like, "Why are you saying numbers?"
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's weird. And pseudonyms are so strange. Hey, like, I mean, that's actually one thing I love to ask people. You've probably answered it on the show before, but people who just have like what is not essentially just a regular human name as their screen name. I'm always super curious to hear why.
Yeah, I can answer. So my pseudonym is Off Edge. It is derived from hanging off edge. I wrote 2 blog posts about stocks about a year ago, and I don't come from finance background. I didn't come from investment banking. I didn't get my MBA. I got my law degree. And in the world of investment, your advantage is called your edge, right? And so the kind of metaphor that I wanted to paint was that I was hanging off the edge because I was not coming from that traditional background. And eventually it got shortened Off Edge.
Ah, cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like even my my ENS domain for my hot wallet is hangingOffEdge.eth. So before I shortened it, but eventually I was like, that's just a mouthful. Off Edge is so much easier.
Are these blog posts out there, or are they?
Yeah, they're still on Medium.
We'll put the link in the show notes, folks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're running up on over an hour. This has been a great conversation, but I do have my traditional closing question that I want to ask you. So let me ask you this. Where do you see yourself in Web3 in the next 6 to 12 months? And where do you see yourself in Web3 in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. That's the first one's tricky. The second one's easy. The first one largely depends on what what occurs within the space, and not just in terms of like the price of Ethereum or Bitcoin or Solana or the price of various NFT collections, but obviously we had a dramatic adoption curve, throughout 2021, and I think for instance, I think June was the lowest NFT trading volume in over 12 months. So needless to say, the adoption curve has sort of slackened off. And for me personally, the idea of what I'll be doing in this space over the next 6 to 12 months, one of the answers is really basic, which is just like building relationships. Like I'm really excited about the idea of certain individuals leaving the ecosystem because they were only here for sort of like a quick buck, and there's various sort of influencers and such who'll move on to the next shiny object. And so I love the idea of meeting people when everybody is poor, because I think that obviously there's an element of that reveals character and intent, and in that way I'm absolutely not trying to curse us, but in that way I kind of hope that we go through a little bit of a prolonged period of whatever, just down, sideways, nothingness, because I think it's really healthy to sort of like shake out back down to that core community. You hear stories of people who were in this space in 2017, 18, and the relationships they formed. And, there's some of the really big names in the space now, like, Lupify and Jimmy and Pranksy and those sorts of guys. And you hear about like the conversations they were having during the bear market. And that's sort of like, in a weird way, I sort of romanticize that, the idea of this community shrinking back down. And I know that's probably controversial, and it's not everyone wants that, and part of me doesn't want it as well. But next 6 to 12 months, really excited about the idea of just building more relationships, hopefully producing some more content myself. But the next 5 to 10 years, that's easy for me. I see it doesn't matter whether it's called Web3 or not. I see this technology, to borrow to butcher a term from Mark Andreessen. I see this technology eating the world. And one thing I said to my wife, actually, when I first jumped into NFTs, once I had admitted that I spent $1,000 Australian dollars on a JPEG, shortly after that, I obviously had some digging to do. I was trying to explain to her, like,
gotta justify this.
yeah, like what the heck all this stuff is. And the thing that became really clear to me early on, which sounds sort of trite, like it sounds like unimportant at this point, but it was important to me. This idea that the only way we have a future without blockchain technology itself is if we have a future without the internet. And we all know what that looks like, right?
We're not worried about our NFTs if we don't have.
No, right. We're whatever, throwing spears at each other.
Quite literally.
Yeah, but the idea that like blockchain technology is now ubiquitous enough that for as long as we have the internet, we'll have that technology. So the level of adoption, the curve of adoption, the preeminent platforms or marketplaces, none of that means anything to me over the long period. The idea of 5 to 10 years, in my mind, it comes back to what we said at the beginning of the show, right? Like being early to something. And I think you pointed out, everybody who's here now is still early in. Like this is like being in Bitcoin in like, I don't know, like maybe like 2016 or something. Like everybody considers those people early. So I think being involved in Web3 at this point is maybe analogous to that. 5 to 10 years, anybody who sticks it out, who is able to stick it out and I think build a reputation and build relationships and a network in the space now, 5 to 10 years, we're going to be looking at a very different world. And if this tech is, if it continues on its adoption curve the way it has been, with cycles in between, of course, I think the ultimate outcome will be that the technology that undergirds Web3 will drastically reshape the way we live our lives. It'll be involved in ways that we can't even imagine right now, right? In the same way that personal computing became the slim bit of metal in your pocket, or the watch on your wrist. It'll be integrated into everything we do, and that is something that really excites me. Being at the ground floor of that is something that I find really interesting. And so my goal over the next, 10 years is a long time, but I would say my goal over the next 5 years is to know as much about the the tech and the use cases and the sort of like emergent properties of this space, such that I can take advantage of it in the most effective way possible. And that's not a financial statement. That's like a genuine sort of like I don't know, people would maybe refer to it as like a more of a lifestyle than anything else, right? Like understand how to harness the power of the technology, and whether that's building a company or whether it's just being a part of really cool communities. That's the thing that I'm most excited about, is kind of getting in on the ground floor.
I love that. I was like romanticizing the answer as you were saying it. Thank you for sharing that. Like I love that.
I felt like I was rambling towards the end there.
No, you weren't. You were, a lot of the words had purpose, Jameson. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And while most of my podcast conversations happen after multiple other conversations, I feel like I've really gotten to know you on this one because it is only our second conversation in the same day. So I hope that this kind of fosters a future learning together relationship, and we can kind of tackle this big Web3 thing together in the next 5 to 10 years. It'd be really cool.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I appreciate that. And yeah, as far as a cold war conversation goes, this was fantastic. So I think you do an amazing job. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for joining Web3 with me. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review, as it'll help us reach more people. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @offedge_. Thanks for vibing in the verse with me, and hope you'll join us next time.